My name is Margaret Collins, and I am 72 years old. At this age, people expect you to fade quietly into the background of life, smiling politely, asking for little, and being grateful for whatever scraps of attention come your way. I used to believe that too. But Mother's Day this year taught me a lesson. I never thought I would need to learn so late in life. I have been a mother for over 5 decades. I raised my children through sleepless nights, unpaid bills, scraped knees, broken hearts, and endless sacrifices that never came with applause. I didn't keep score. Mothers rarely do. We give because that is what love demands. Mother's Day used to mean something in our house. Not grand celebrations, but simple gestures. A phone call, a handwritten card, a shared meal. In recent years, even those small things had started to disappear. Still, I told myself not to expect too much. They're busy, I'd whisper to my reflection. Life moves fast. That Sunday morning, I woke earlier than usual. Old habits don't die easily. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching sunlight stretch across the quiet street. My phone lay on the table beside me, silent. No call, no message. No card slipped under the door. By noon, the silence felt louder than any argument ever had. I checked my phone again, pretending. I hadn't already looked a dozen times. Nothing. Not from my son Daniel. Not from my daughter Rebecca. Not even from my daughter-in-law, who never missed a chance to remind me how old-fashioned I was. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. It did. Deeply. But what hurt more was how familiar the feeling had become, being remembered only when needed. I spent that afternoon alone, cooking a small meal I barely touched. I folded laundry that didn't need folding. I cleaned shelves that were already spotless. Anything to keep my hands busy so my heart wouldn't wander where it didn't belong. By evening, I told myself I would not cry. 72-year-old women don't cry over missed holidays, I reasoned. We learn to swallow disappointment the same way. We swallow pills with water and dignity. Then 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was warm, almost cheerful. Too cheerful. Hi, Mom. How are you doing? I smiled automatically, even though he couldn't see it. I'm fine, dear. How are you? A brief pause followed. Not long enough to be awkward, but long enough for me to sense what was coming. Mom, I was wondering if you could help us out a little, he said carefully. Just temporarily. There it was. No apology for Mother's Day. No acknowledgement. Straight to the request. Rebecca called later that same day. Different words, same intention. Bills were piling up. Expenses had increased. Things were tight right now. They spoke as if I were a savings account, not a woman who had just spent Mother's Day staring at an unanswered phone. I listened quietly. I didn't interrupt. I didn't scold. Years ago, I might have rushed to help without hesitation. After all, that's what mothers do, right? But something had shifted inside me. I thought about the long nights I worked extra shifts, the vacations I never took, the dreams I postponed indefinitely, so my children could have more. I thought about the silence on Mother's Day, the way it revealed where I now stood in their lives. Useful, but forgettable. That night, I sat at my old writing desk, the one my late husband bought me decades ago. I opened a notebook I hadn't touched in years and began writing, not out of anger, but clarity. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask a dangerous question. What if love doesn't mean endless sacrifice? The thought scared me, but it also felt honest. I wasn't angry at my children. I was tired. Tired of being invisible until money entered the conversation. Tired of teaching lessons no one seemed to learn. So I decided to do something I had never done before. I decided to wait. No immediate yes, no rushed bank transfer, no reassuring promises, just silence. The same silence they had offered me on Mother's Day. As I closed my notebook, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not bitterness, not revenge, but resolve. They had forgotten Mother's Day. They had asked me for money. What they didn't know was that this time, the answer would change everything, and they were not prepared for the consequences. Silence can be a powerful teacher. In my 72 years, I had filled silence with excuses. They're busy. They didn't mean it. Next time will be different. But this time I let the silence stay. I didn't rush to call Daniel back. I didn't text Rebecca with comforting words. I simply waited. At first, it felt unnatural. Mothers are conditioned to respond immediately. We are trained to soften discomfort, to rescue, to give. Sitting still while my children struggled felt almost cruel. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't cruelty. It was boundaries, something I had never learned to draw. Over the next few days, I noticed how often my thoughts drifted backward. I remembered myself at 45, working 2 jobs after my husband passed away suddenly. No safety net, no inheritance, just 2 children, a mortgage, and grief that had nowhere to go. I remembered skipping meals so Daniel could afford college textbooks. I remembered Rebecca's wedding, the dress I helped pay for, the loan I never asked to be repaid. I remembered telling myself, this is what love looks like. But I also remembered something else. Not once during those years had I ever asked my children how I was managing. Not emotionally, not financially. I didn't resent them for that. I had trained them well to see me as unbreakable. Unbreakable women are often forgotten. On the 4th day after Daniel's call, he rang again. This time, his voice carried a hint of frustration. "Mom, did you get my message?" "I was just checking in." "Yes, Daniel," I replied calmly. "I got it." Another pause. "So what do you think?" I looked around my living room, the furniture I had owned for decades, the framed photographs fading at the edges, the quiet that filled every corner. This house held my entire adult life. It also held my future, a future I had barely planned for, because I was always planning for others. "I'm thinking," I said simply. Thinking. That one word unsettled him. Rebecca didn't wait as long. She showed up at my door 2 days later, her energy sharp, impatient. She hugged me quickly, more out of habit than warmth. "Mom, we really need help," she said, sitting down without being invited. "Things are hard right now." I made tea, slowly, deliberately. "I understand things can be difficult," I said. "They always are at some point." She sighed. "You have savings. You've always said it's for family." I met her eyes then. Truly met them. "I said it was for security," I corrected gently. "Mine." The word hung between us like something fragile. Rebecca frowned. "Are you saying you won't help?" I took a breath. This was the moment, the one I had avoided my entire life. "I'm saying I need to talk first," I replied. "About more than money." She looked uncomfortable. "About what?" "About respect," I said. "About remembering I'm your mother even when you don't need something." Her expression shifted. Defensive. Confused. "Mom, don't be dramatic. We just forgot Mother's Day." Forgot. Such a small word for such a large wound. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply spoke the truth. When you forget Mother's Day, I feel invisible. When the next call is about money, I feel used. I've spent my life giving. I don't regret it. But I won't pretend it doesn't hurt. Rebecca looked away. Silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't empty. It was heavy. "I didn't know you felt that way," she murmured. I nodded, because I never told you. "That's on me too." That night, after she left, I sat alone again, but not lonely. I felt something unfamiliar growing stronger inside me. Self-respect. Not loud, not angry, just steady. I pulled out my notebook and wrote until my hand ached. I wrote about aging. About how society slowly trains older women to accept less. Less attention. Less voice, less importance. I wrote about how money complicates love, and how silence reveals priorities. For the first time, I also wrote about my future. What if I lived for myself now? The next week brought another call. This time from Daniel and Rebecca together. A joint effort. That alone told me they were worried. "Mom," Daniel said, "we talked. We didn't mean to make you feel bad." "I believe you," I replied. "So it's about the money?" Rebecca asked cautiously. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "I will help," I said slowly, "but not the way you expect." They listened closely. "I will not give you money without a plan, and I will not drain my savings. I need to protect myself too. If I help, it will be structured, limited, and respectful." There it was, my line in the sand. They were quiet. I could almost hear them adjusting, recalculating, a version of me they had taken for granted. "Okay," Daniel finally said. "We can talk about that." After the call ended, I sat very still. My hands trembled, not from fear, but release. I hadn't lost my children. I hadn't rejected them. I had simply changed the rules. That night, I slept better than I had in years. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that my decision had set something else in motion. Something they never expected. Because sometimes the real shock isn't in saying no. It's in finally saying enough. There comes a moment in life when you realize that love, if left unchecked, can slowly turn into entitlement. I had crossed 72 years before I truly understood that truth. Not because my children were cruel, but because I had spent a lifetime teaching them that I would always be there, no matter the cost to myself. After our conversation, things became different. Daniel and Rebecca didn't call as often. Not angrily, not coldly, just cautiously, as if they were unsure how to speak to this new version of their mother, the one who paused before answering, the one who asked questions, the one who no longer rushed to rescue. And I let them adjust. In the quiet that followed, I focused on myself. I revisited my finances carefully, something I had avoided for years because it felt selfish. I met with a financial advisor. I learned how long my savings truly needed to last. I confronted the reality of aging, not with fear but responsibility. For the first time, I planned my future without assuming my children would always be my safety net, or that I should be theirs. Weeks later, Daniel invited me to dinner. A real invitation, not a request, not a favor, just dinner. When I arrived, I noticed the change immediately. The way they greeted me, the way they listened instead of interrupting. Respect had returned, not demanded, but earned through absence. Halfway through the meal, Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, we didn't realize how much pressure we'd been putting on you," he said quietly. Rebecca nodded, her eyes damp. "We always assumed you were fine, strong. We didn't think about what would happen if you weren't." I placed my fork down gently. "That's the danger of strong women," I replied. "People forget they're human." Silence settled, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. Then Daniel said something I never expected. "We figured something out. Without your money." My heart tightened, not with fear but surprise. "We downsized," Rebecca continued. "Cut expenses. Made changes. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." I looked at them, really looked at them, and saw growth where guilt used to be. "I'm proud of you," I said, and meant it. After dinner, Daniel walked me to my car. Before I got in, he hugged me, not the quick, distracted hugs of the past, but the kind that linger. "Happy late Mother's Day," he whispered. I smiled, tears finally escaping. "Thank you." That night, as I drove home, I realized something profound. The shock wasn't that I didn't give them money. The shock was that they learned they could survive without it, and that I could survive without being needed. In the months that followed, our relationship transformed. Not perfect, but healthier. They called because they wanted to talk, not because they needed something. They visited without an agenda. They asked how I was doing, and I answered honestly. I traveled for the first time in years. Nothing extravagant, just small trips that reminded me the world was still wide, still welcoming. I joined a book club. I laughed more. I slept better. One afternoon, while organizing old papers, I found a Mother's Day card from decades ago, handmade, crayon-stained, clumsy with love. I held it carefully, smiling. Motherhood doesn't end when children grow up, but it does evolve. And sometimes, the greatest gift a mother can give isn't money, or sacrifice, or silence. It's boundaries. If you are listening to my story and you are an older woman, especially a mother, let me tell you this. You are allowed to be remembered without being useful. You are allowed to be loved without being drained. You are allowed to say no and still be a good mother. They forgot Mother's Day. They asked me for money. What they got instead was a lesson in respect, independence, and the quiet strength of a woman who finally chose herself. And that, more than any check, I could have written, changed all our lives forever.